Under the pitch-black sky of Jackson, Mississippi, the night was torn apart by the deafening wail of police sirens howling like the scream of a predator. The flashing red and blue lights flickered wildly, reflecting in Ava Sharma's rearview mirror like sharp blades slicing through the last shred of peace she had left. Ava, an FBI agent with a heart of steel and a past marked by scars, never imagined she would become the prey in the very system she swore to protect with her life. The wheels screeched on the pavement, her breath ragged as her eyes glanced at the silhouette of an officer emerging from the fog. His eyes were as cold as ice, his sinister grin curving like a crescent beneath the flickering streetlights, revealing a dark plot more terrifying than her worst nightmare. The sound of metal clinking rang out as he tapped the butt of his gun against the car window, each beat landing like a hammer to Ava's chest. This wasn't a routine check. This was a declaration of war. Behind those eyes, she felt the darkness closing in, a web of deception and betrayal set to consume her. Who was behind all of this? What horrifying secret was waiting to explode, threatening not only her life, but the world she once trusted? The sharp wail of police sirens ripped through the stillness of the night, as if warning the entire city that something was about to shatter. The air was thick, oppressive, and the deep, guttural sound of the sirens seemed to echo off the empty streets, adding to the unnerving stillness that hung like a heavy cloud. In the rearview mirror of Ava Sharma's car, the flashing red and blue lights flickered erratically, casting jagged, pulsating streaks of light that cut through the tension like sharp blades. The light seemed to reach into her soul, slicing away the final remnants of calm she had clung to. Each flash felt like a reminder that she was no longer in control. Ava's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as her gaze locked on the reflection of the patrol car. The piercing lights flickered across her face, lighting up her features in fleeting moments, giving her a distorted, almost ghostly look. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of caution and fear, her lips pressed tightly together. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat like a ticking time bomb, her breath shallow and uneven. She felt her pulse thumping in her ears as the tension in her body mounted. She had been here before, many times in fact, but this was different. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, smothering her in a way she had never experienced. As she glanced at the rearview mirror again, she saw the shadowy figure of the officer emerging from the fog that rolled in from the empty streets. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost predatory as he approached. Her eyes instinctively snapped to his, but his gaze never met hers. Instead, it seemed to hover just above her, cold and distant, staring into something beyond her, something she couldn't comprehend. It was an unsettling feeling, one that sent a chill down her spine. She quickly recalled the phone call she'd received just hours ago, a call that had set everything into motion. The voice, deep and cryptic, still echoed in her mind. "Trust no one," it had said. Those words had wormed their way into her thoughts, twisting and turning with every mile she drove. They refused to let go, haunting her, making every decision feel like it was under a microscope. The voice had been strange, unsettling, as though it knew things that Ava didn't. It was as if someone had cast a shadow over her entire existence, plunging her into doubt where there was once certainty. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. No. This was something far more sinister, something that she could feel in the very marrow of her bones. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body remained rooted in place, the weight of the situation keeping her in that seat. The officer's slow, deliberate steps as he neared her car window were like a countdown, each footfall amplifying the silence that surrounded them. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched, that every move she made was being calculated, dissected. The officer's presence loomed larger, his figure growing in her vision until it felt like he was all there was. The sharp contrast of the flashing lights painted his face in dark shadow, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. She couldn't read him, couldn't understand him. His mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Ava felt her stomach twist. This wasn't the smile of someone doing their job. No, it was something more. It was the smile of someone who knew more than they should, someone who was playing a game she didn't understand, but was already deeply involved in. As the officer's hand moved toward his belt, the sound of metal clinking echoed in the otherwise silent night. The heavy thud of the guns, but as it tapped against her car window, sent a jolt through her, as if the noise itself had shattered her composure. Ava held her breath. The officer's movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed, and as his fingers gripped the gun, she knew this was not a routine check. This was a direct threat, a confrontation she wasn't prepared for. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, the tension in her body building with every passing second. Her mind raced back to the conversation she had had, the quiet whispers in dark rooms, the dossier full of information that no one else was supposed to see. Ava had spent years learning to trust her instincts, to read between the lines, to see things others couldn't. But now, everything felt wrong. The familiar faces, the once trusted colleagues, were all starting to blur into something she couldn't recognize. The carefully constructed web of alliances she had built over the years now seemed fragile, as if one wrong move could send it all crashing down. Her thoughts spiraled. Was this the moment when everything she had fought for, her career, her values, her sense of purpose, was about to be torn apart? The officer's slow, deliberate knock against the window pulled her back to reality, but the unease that had settled deep in her gut refused to dissipate. The sound of the gun tapping against her window felt like an anchor, weighing her down, trapping her in this moment. She felt the car shrinking around her, the space closing in, making it harder to breathe. The darkness of the night seemed to press against the glass, as though it were waiting for something, for her to make the wrong move, to say the wrong thing. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, but her voice was shaky, the words barely audible above the pounding of her heart. She couldn't let him see her fear. She couldn't let him know that this wasn't just another case, not just another threat. This was different. This was personal. The officer's shadow now loomed over her, blocking out the last remnants of light. His breath fogged the window, and for a moment, all she could see was the outline of his face, cold, emotionless, almost too perfect. Everything inside her screamed to run, but she stayed frozen, every muscle in her body locked in place. The silence stretched, each second an eternity. Who was this man? What did he want from her? The questions rattled around in her mind, unanswered, creating a storm of fear that made it harder to think straight. Was this just another pawn in a larger game, or was he the one who was controlling the pieces? As the officer's gaze finally shifted toward her, Ava knew she wasn't just facing a man in uniform. She was facing something far darker, something that threatened not only her life, but the very fabric of everything she had worked for. And in that moment, she understood. The storm was coming. The officer stood frozen next to the car, his figure barely visible in the dim light of the street lamps. The flashing red and blue lights of the patrol car no longer filled the air with their frantic pulse. Instead, a thick, suffocating silence wrapped around them, pressing down like a heavy weight. The tension hung in the air, thick enough to taste. Ava could feel every inch of her body coiled tight, ready to spring into action or freeze in fear. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind through the trees, the kind of eerie quiet that made her skin crawl. Then, the stillness was shattered by his voice, low, cold, and deliberate. "Get out of the car, Ava." Each word seemed to hang in the air, sharp like a blade being drawn slowly across skin. The power behind his command wasn't just in the words themselves, but in the way they felt, as though they were not a request but a decree, a verdict already passed. Ava's heart stuttered in her chest, and a chill ran down her spine. The fear wasn't just in the demand. It was in the fact that he knew her real name. Her breath caught in her throat. Her real name, the name that only her closest colleagues, the ones she had trusted with her life, knew. It was exposed, dragged into the open in the dead of night under a shadow that seemed to deepen the very moment he spoke. She felt a cold sweat forming on her forehead, but it wasn't from the chill of the night air. No, it was the sting of fear, a fear she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. Her pulse quickened, every beat a loud drum in her ears, reminding her that she was trapped, exposed in this invisible web that was tightening with each second. His eyes never wavered. He stared at her with an intensity that felt like a vice around her chest, like he could see right through her to the very core of everything she had built. She had known threats. She had dealt with enemies before. But this was different. This wasn't a routine situation. This was a personal assault on everything she had known. His gaze was ice-cold, unwavering, and it sent a chill deeper than the night itself, as if every movement she made was being calculated in real time. There was no escape from the way his eyes pinned her in place, paralyzing her with the sheer weight of his presence. The wind picked up again, but it only seemed to emphasize the deafening silence between them. She could hear her own breath, shallow and rapid, mixing with the pounding of her heart. The officer's hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing the side of his gun. The sound, so faint, so deliberate, felt like the ticking of a bomb. She wanted to scream, to do something, anything to break the stillness, but her body was frozen, unwilling to obey her commands. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to flee, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor of the car. The world outside had faded into a blur. The road, the dark silhouettes of trees, the distant lights of the city. Everything was irrelevant now. There was only him, the officer standing there with his cold smile, and the feeling of the trap closing in around her. The air was heavy with unspoken threats, and Ava knew with every fiber of her being that this was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something far darker, something that threatened not just her life, but everything she had ever believed in. Her mind raced. Who was this man? What did he know? And more terrifying still, how had he gotten this close? The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest like a physical force, suffocating her. The people she had trusted, the ones she had thought were on her side, had one of them sold her out? The questions came one after the other, but none of them offered any relief, only more uncertainty, more fear. And then, without warning, the officer's hand moved again. His fingers wrapped around the door handle, slowly, deliberately, and Ava's entire body tensed, anticipating what would happen next. The door creaked, the sound echoing through the silence like a death knell. The weight of his next move hung in the balance. Would she survive this moment, or would it all come crashing down? Ava didn't hesitate. In an instant, her survival instincts took over. She swiftly drew her gun from her belt, pointing it directly at the officer. "Step back." Her voice rang out, strong yet tense, reverberating in the stillness of the night. Her eyes locked onto the weapon, her fingers tightening around the trigger as if she could control everything around her by sheer force of will. The officer didn't respond immediately, but in his eyes, Ava saw the change. It wasn't fear. No, it was cold, calculated decisiveness. He looked at her for what felt like an eternity, then slowly, he began to retreat. But just as Ava thought she might be able to breathe again, he lunged at her, quick as lightning, like he had anticipated every move she'd make. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Without thinking, she spun around, her feet pounding against the ground as she sprinted towards the empty road. The sharp metallic scent of oil and the damp earth from the night air filled her lungs, and the sound of her feet slapping against the cold asphalt echoed, adding weight to the already oppressive atmosphere. She ran faster, pushing herself as though she could outrun the air itself, but the sound of pursuing footsteps kept hammering in her ears, relentless and heavy. Her breath came in ragged gasps, mingling with the soft patter of rain beginning to fall. The sound of each droplet hitting the pavement felt like a drumbeat in her chest, an alarming rhythm marking her desperate escape. The rhythm of her heart matched the chaos within her, fast, erratic, like it was trying to outpace the fear coursing through her veins. She glanced around, but all she could see was the thick, suffocating darkness closing in around her. Her mind raced faster than her feet, each thought colliding with the next. Where was she going? How far could she run? And the most terrifying question of all, what did the officer know that she didn't? Her pulse pounded in her throat, every step becoming more urgent, as if the very ground beneath her could betray her at any moment. Then, as if fate had thrown her a brief lifeline, Ava saw a small alley ahead. Without a second thought, she launched herself into the shadows, her body slipping into the darkness like a ghost. Her heart thundered as she sprinted into the narrow alley, the sounds of the pursuit fading behind her. But she knew this was only temporary. The distance was only a brief respite, a breath between storms. Every step she took made the air feel thicker, more suffocating, her lungs burning with the effort. She stopped, pressing her back against the rough brick wall of the alley, trying to steady her breathing. For a fleeting moment, she was safe, but the relief was fleeting. Her mind was still in a storm, her thoughts crashing against one another, demanding answers she didn't have. Why was he chasing her? Who was pulling the strings behind this? This wasn't just a run for her life. It was the beginning of something far darker, something much more dangerous. Ava knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just running from an officer. She was running from a conspiracy she couldn't yet understand, and the further she ran, the deeper into the maze she was pulled. Every corner she turned, every shadow she hid in, only seemed to reveal more questions, and the answers were nowhere to be found. She had entered a deadly game where nothing was what it seemed, and every piece on the board could betray her at any moment. Ava stepped into the abandoned warehouse, the heavy, rusted door groaning in protest as she pushed it open. The sound echoed through the empty space, a shrill, piercing cry that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. Inside, the darkness was nearly suffocating, broken only by the faintest slivers of moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. The musty scent of old wood, mildew, and rust filled her lungs as she stepped further inside. The air was damp, heavy with the weight of years of neglect, but in this forsaken place, she found a brief moment of solitude, a fleeting shelter from the storm that was chasing her. She crouched, her knees creaking in protest, and gingerly inspected the small wound on her hand. It was a shallow cut, a scrape from a shard of glass that had flown from the window during her frantic escape, but it throbbed with a painful reminder of her physical limits. Blood trickled from the scratch, dark and sticky against the pale skin of her palm. The wound wasn't severe, but the pain, the constant reminder of the chase, spread through her, dragging her down. The exhaustion, too, began to set in. Her muscles screamed for rest, but her mind refused to grant her that reprieve. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not when everything was hanging by a thread. Shaking her head, Ava fought to push the pain and weariness aside. She had been in worse situations before, but this time, this situation felt different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for her survival. She was fighting for answers, answers that had been evading her for far too long. The chase, the cryptic call, the name Erebus, all of it was connected in ways she couldn't yet understand. But she knew this was no coincidence. Someone was pulling the strings, and she was caught in the middle of something much darker than she could ever imagine. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the old voice recorder from her bag. It was nearly forgotten, an artifact from a past long buried beneath her work, but now it felt like the only piece of the puzzle she had left. She clicked the play button, and the distorted voice from the earlier call crackled to life in the empty, oppressive silence of the warehouse. Project Erebus. The voice rasped, the words thick with an ominous weight, like a promise of something terrible yet to come. Ava's stomach twisted at the sound. She had heard those words before. The name Erebus wasn't just a random word. It was a key to something dark and secretive. She remembered the brief mention of Erebus in a top-secret report she had seen months ago, buried deep within an FBI investigation. It had been a fleeting reference, a name that passed by too quickly, too quietly. No one was allowed to ask questions about it. It was classified, sealed away under layers of security and secrecy. But now the name was echoing in her ears once more, a ghost from the past that was coming back to haunt her. She rewound the recording, listening again, hoping for some new clue, some thread to follow. But there was nothing more. The voice was gone, leaving only the chill of its warning in the air. Ava's mind raced. Project Erebus. What did it mean? What was it? Her mind returned to that briefing at the FBI. She had sat there, surrounded by her colleagues, all of them oblivious to the secrets hiding in plain sight. She had been warned, but no one could have known that the name would resurface in her life like this. No one could have known that she would be the one to uncover its truth. The sound of her breath in the darkness was the only thing breaking the silence now. Her thoughts spun wildly, each question louder than the last, and for the first time in a long while, Ava felt her control slipping away. She could almost feel the walls closing in on her, as if the warehouse itself were trapping her inside its decaying embrace. The hunt was no longer a simple chase. It was a game with stakes far higher than she had ever imagined, and she was in the thick of it. She sank down onto the cold, damp floor of the warehouse, her back against the peeling wood of the wall. She felt the weight of the darkness around her, pressing in on all sides. The silence was oppressive, the kind that pressed against your chest and made it hard to breathe. But as the minutes passed, the loneliness seemed to crystallize into something else, a resolve, a fire that slowly burned brighter within her. She had no allies, no one to turn to, no one to trust. But she didn't need them. She didn't need anyone. She was the one who had to uncover the truth. She was the one who had to find out what Project Erebus was and why it had brought her here, to this moment of desperation. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the battle she was preparing for. This was no longer just about survival. It was about facing the unknown, about confronting the darkness that was closing in on her from every direction. The faint hum of distant traffic outside, the echo of a passing car, it was all so far away, as though she were cut off from the world entirely. There was no turning back now. The eerie quiet of the warehouse seemed to stretch on forever. Every shadow felt like a threat, every creak of the building a warning. Ava knew she was on the brink of something far bigger than herself. The pursuit, the cryptic phone call, the name Erebus, everything was pointing to one truth. She had walked into something monstrous, something far beyond her comprehension. And she couldn't stop now. Ava stood up, her legs stiff from sitting for too long. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but her mind was already set. She had no choice but to move forward. She had no choice but to unravel this mystery piece by piece until it was all laid bare in front of her. There was no turning back. The truth would come out one way or another, and Ava Sharma was going to make sure of it. The soft, measured footsteps echoed outside the warehouse, adding to the rising tension coursing through Ava's veins. She froze, holding her breath, her eyes fixed on the small gap between the decaying wooden planks of the wall. Every sense was heightened, her body tense like a coiled spring. The stillness around her made every tiny sound razor-sharp, vibrating through the quiet in ways that felt unnervingly alive. The footsteps were deliberate, not rushed, but what unsettled her most was the silence that followed each step. No breaths, no rustling, no sound beyond the footsteps themselves. Whoever was out there was moving with calculated precision, like a shadow slipping through the night. Ava dared not move, her body stiff with anticipation, her heart hammering in her chest. Each second felt like an eternity. Her gaze never left the gap in the wall, the only sliver of the outside world she could watch through without being seen. And then, in the blink of an eye, she saw it. A figure gliding past the door, a shadow that merged with the night. A man wearing a mask stood motionless just outside the entrance, scanning the shadows of the warehouse with unnerving attention. He wasn't the officer from earlier. This was something else entirely, a fresh threat, a ghost that moved without leaving a trace. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He was just there, standing like a specter, chilling in his stillness. But that stillness, so heavy, so unnatural, sent a wave of unease crashing over Ava. There was no time for further thought. She had to act, and quickly. Her body shifted into motion, every step silent, deliberate, like a predator on the hunt. Her hand grazed the cold metal barrels stacked nearby, and in that instant, a spark of an idea flickered in her mind. With practiced speed, she seized one of the metal barrels, pushing it forcefully to the ground. The sound of it crashing to the floor was deafening, shattering the oppressive silence with an explosion of noise. It was the perfect distraction. The masked man spun around, his head snapping in the direction of the noise, just as Ava darted back into the shadows, pressing herself against the dark corner of the warehouse. Her eyes locked onto him, waiting. The masked figure hesitated, his ears straining for any other sound, before he turned and started to walk away. His footsteps faintly echoed as he moved deeper into the dark, unaware of the threat now looming over him. Ava remained frozen, her breath heavy but controlled, forcing herself to remain as silent as possible. The seconds felt like hours, but as his footsteps grew fainter and fainter, she allowed herself the smallest exhale of relief. She had narrowly escaped, slipping through the grasp of danger once again. But the lingering feeling of being watched stayed with her. The unease gnawed at her insides, as if invisible eyes were still following her, waiting for the moment she would falter. Everyone knows the sensation of being observed without knowing why, but Ava wasn't going to let herself be paralyzed by it. She wasn't some helpless prey to be hunted. She had proven that she was more than capable of surviving, of staying one step ahead, even when the odds were stacked against her. Every move she made, every breath she took, was calculated, and she knew that as long as she kept her wits about her, the darkness that surrounded her would not claim her. She would continue to fight. The night may be dark, but the light of her intelligence and resilience would guide her through it, leading her toward whatever challenge awaited next. As the masked figure disappeared into the night, Ava stood frozen in the darkness, her eyes still locked on his movements until he melted completely into the shadows. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of her thoughts. Suddenly, a faint beam of light from the flashlight illuminated the ground, casting long, eerie shadows. Ava's gaze darted to the ground, and her pulse quickened when she saw a small piece of paper lying there, discarded carelessly. Her instincts screamed that this could be the clue she desperately needed. Without hesitation, she moved swiftly toward it, crouching down to pick it up. The paper was worn, frayed at the edges, as if it had been carried for a long time. As her fingers unfurled it, she squinted at the hastily scribbled words. The ink was smeared in places, as if it had gotten wet at some point, but Ava could still make out the message. Old Safe House, outskirts of Jackson. The address hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had heard of this place. It was an old FBI safe house, long abandoned after newer, more secure facilities were built. But the sight of the name, the mention of this forgotten location, sent a shiver down her spine. Why was it being referenced now? Why had it appeared in a context like this? Ava couldn't let it go. It wasn't just a coincidence. The mysterious call, the cryptic reference to Project Erebus, and now this clue. It all seemed to be drawing her towards something far darker. Each piece was slowly clicking into place, and Ava felt an undeniable pull, as if she were standing at the edge of something vast, something that could shatter everything she thought she knew about her organization. Her hand came up to her face, rubbing her eyes in an attempt to shake off the exhaustion that suddenly gripped her. Fatigue washed over her in a wave, but there was no time for rest. She had to act now. The decision to go to the old safe house could be the turning point she needed, the key to unlocking the truth that had been locked away for so long. This was a place forgotten by time, ignored by everyone else. That's precisely why it might hold the answers, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone bold enough to uncover them. It could be a storage unit long abandoned, or perhaps a secret lair holding forbidden knowledge. Either way, Ava knew she couldn't let this chance slip through her fingers. With a deep breath, she grabbed her backpack and slung it over her shoulder, stepping into the night. She felt an overwhelming weight settle on her chest. Each step she took seemed to pull her deeper into a web of danger she hadn't yet fully comprehended. The chase earlier, the masked figure, the threats, none of it had ended. It was merely a prelude, a taste of the much larger, more perilous game she was now entangled in. But Ava wasn't afraid. If anything, the fear pushed her forward. She knew that no matter how treacherous the road ahead might be, she had no choice but to press on. The truth would not come to her willingly. She had to fight for it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked, her mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but each new clue only seemed to create more questions. Why was Project Erebus so important? Who was behind it all? And why did they want to keep Ava from uncovering the truth? The answers felt just out of reach, elusive like shadows in the dark. But one thing was clear. Stepping onto this path had put her in a spiral from which there was no turning back. She was already too far in, and now she had no choice but to see it through to the end, whatever it might cost. The rain grew heavier, falling in sheets, pouring down relentlessly from the sky. Ava sat behind the wheel, the headlights cutting through the thick, murky veil of rain that obscured the road ahead. The world outside seemed swallowed by the storm, dim, hazy, as if visibility itself had been lost. She sped down the empty streets of Jackson, the only sounds piercing the silence of the night being the rhythm of the engine and the constant, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windshield. Each time the tires splashed through large puddles, water flew up and splattered against the glass, leaving behind fleeting, disorienting patterns, silent reminders of the storm that mirrored the chaos inside her mind. Her thoughts wandered back to the early days of her career, when everything had seemed so clear, so certain. Justice, the ideal she had sworn to protect, had been her guiding light. It had been her unwavering compass, leading her through every trial, every decision, with the firm belief that what she was doing mattered. But now, everything felt like it was slipping away. Each step she took felt like a shock to her system. The ideals, the convictions she had held so dearly, were gradually unraveling, leaving behind a hollow void inside her, a painful realization that everything she had fought for was now just a pile of broken fragments beyond repair. The weight of disappointment and sorrow pressed down on her chest, the heaviness suffocating her. It wasn't a new feeling, this loss, but it hurt more now because it wasn't some abstract concept. She could feel the brutal truth of it in her bones. There was no more protection and justice, no certainty in any decision she made anymore. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, yet her gaze never wavered from the road ahead. It was as though the path before her was fading, like she was driving into an endless fog, powerless to change the course. And then, in the reflection of the rearview mirror, a strange light flickered, something out of place. Ava narrowed her eyes, an instinctive sense of wrongness creeping over her. She quickly checked the rearview mirror again and froze. There, trailing her, unmistakably close but keeping a deliberate distance, was a car with no visible license plates. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a random passerby. A cold shiver ran down her spine as the realization hit. She wasn't alone. A growing unease rippled through her, spreading through every fiber of her being. Then, as if to confirm her fears, she glanced down at the dashboard and noticed a faint warning light flickering, an unfamiliar signal on the display. In a flash, her mind raced. She looked down, quickly reaching beneath her seat. Her fingers brushed against something cold, small, and metallic. A tracker, a device neatly affixed to the underside of the car. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't just following her from behind. They knew her every move. They knew where she was, every second, every turn she made. The walls of the world seemed to close in around her. There was no place to hide, no place to run. The helpless feeling of being cornered gripped her heart. She wasn't just being hunted. She was being watched, methodically, relentlessly. The image of a trap, a steel cage slowly closing in on her, crept into her mind. She couldn't escape. She was being funneled into this nightmare, and the only way out was forward, no matter the danger, no matter the unknown that waited ahead. Her breath quickened, and she couldn't shake the sense of dread that loomed over her. Every decision, every move she made, felt like it was being calculated. Every inch of her journey was a trap carefully set to ensnare her. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside her. The relentless pressure, the never-ending push forward with no end in sight. She could almost hear the walls closing in. The feeling of being pursued, of losing control, made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. There was nowhere safe anymore. Everything she had relied on had been taken from her, and now it was just her against an invisible, unstoppable force. She didn't have the luxury of slowing down. There was only one way out, and that was to keep moving forward, no matter the risk, no matter the unknown. There was no turning back, and in that moment, Ava knew that the journey ahead would be far darker and more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. But it was the only road she could take, the only choice left, and she had to walk it alone. The old FBI safe house sat silently on the outskirts of Jackson, a relic of the past, faded and forgotten. The iron door was rusted, its hinges squealing in protest as Ava pushed it open. A narrow gap let in just enough light from her flashlight to reveal the decaying walls and piles of rubble inside. The air was thick with neglect, the smell of mildew and old paper mingling with the dust that had settled over everything. She couldn't afford to linger. Time was against her. All she could do now was search for any clue that might bring her closer to the truth about Project Erebus. As she moved through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, a stark reminder of the isolation and desperation she now faced. Each room seemed to contain nothing but darkness and decay, as if this place had been abandoned not just by people, but by hope itself. She pressed on, determined, until she reached a small, dimly lit room in the back. There, amid the rusting filing cabinets and overturned furniture, she spotted something, a thick folder, discarded carelessly as if forgotten. It felt like a coincidence, but deep down, Ava knew better. This was the clue she had been searching for. She quickly approached and grabbed the file. It was thick, secured by an old rubber band, its surface worn and frayed. The cover had strange, cryptic symbols scribbled across it, symbols that looked as though they had been coded long ago. Her heart raced as she tore off the rubber band, ripping the outer paper to expose the contents inside. With trembling hands, she began flipping through the pages, her flashlight casting an eerie glow over the text. As she read, the documents were dense, filled with complex codes and cryptic phrases, but Ava's focus sharpened, her mind quickly piecing together the fragments. And then, just as she decrypted part of the text, her heart stopped. The words struck her like a physical blow. Project Erebus was not a research project or a security initiative. It was a covert operation, a twisted plot orchestrated by the FBI to trap its own agents. The goal was to turn these agents into pawns in fabricated cases, forcing them into impossible situations with no way out. Every case, every decision they made, had been predetermined. They weren't heroes of justice. They were mere chess pieces, controlled and manipulated in a dirty game. The truth cut deep, like a knife to the chest. The revelation wasn't just shocking. It felt like a betrayal so profound that it shook Ava to her core. All the years of loyalty she had given to the agency, all the ideals she had fought for, now seemed meaningless. They were just tools, instruments of exploitation. She wasn't the first agent to fall into this trap, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. The others, the ones who had sacrificed everything, had most likely been unwittingly ensnared in the same web. They had been sacrificed without ever knowing the truth. The pain of it was unbearable, a sharp sting that seemed to tear through her very soul. But with the pain came a surge of anger, a fire of resolve. Her loyalty would no longer be used against her. The ones behind Project Erebus would pay for their manipulation. But as the anger swelled within her, so did the realization of the danger that now surrounded her. If she had uncovered the truth, then those responsible for it were also aware of her. Every move she made was being watched. She wasn't just up against a rogue agency. She was fighting the very people she had once trusted, her colleagues, her friends, who had now become enemies. The path ahead was clear but perilous. She had no way out. The walls were closing in. The only option left was to confront the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. There was no turning back now. The room plunged into utter darkness as Ava's flashlight suddenly flickered out, leaving her surrounded by an impenetrable blackness. A chill enveloped the room, heavy and suffocating, as if the very air was closing in on her. It was as though a door once open to truth had slammed shut, trapping her inside. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her chest, the feeling of being ensnared in a trap she couldn't escape creeping over her. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a gunshot rang out, breaking the stillness with a deafening crack. Ava whipped around, but before she could react, a blinding beam of light cut through the darkness. A squad of agents rushed in through the back door, their weapons drawn, their presence overwhelming. Her eyes went wide with disbelief as the scene unfolded before her. At the front of the group was someone she never thought she would face again, Daniel Voss, a former colleague, a partner she had once trusted with her life. They had worked side by side in countless tense operations, sharing victories, losses, and the weariness of their dangerous work. But now, standing in front of her, Daniel was no longer the ally she had known. His eyes were cold, devoid of emotion, as if all the shared experiences between them had been erased, replaced with the indifference of a stranger. "Take her down," Daniel commanded, his voice firm and without hesitation. His words were sharp, like a knife slicing through the air. There was no room for negotiation, no pause for understanding, just a cold order that cut straight to the heart of Ava's world. The sting of betrayal hit her like a gut punch, making her feel as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. This wasn't just an ambush. It was the death of everything she had believed in. Ava felt cornered, trapped with nowhere to go. The agents surrounding her, moving swiftly and decisively, made one thing painfully clear: she was no longer an ally to them. She was a target, a criminal to be eliminated. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the staggering realization that everything she had fought for was now just a lie. The confusion and disbelief flooded her mind as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. Daniel, her friend, her partner, was now standing with those who had betrayed her. All the memories of the times they had fought side by side, of the dangers they had faced together, now felt like hollow echoes. The sense of being deceived, of being lied to at the very core of her being, was overwhelming. The betrayal was too much to bear. But even as the weight of it pressed down on her, Ava refused to crumble. She couldn't. She had fought too hard for too long. She had to fight back. As the agents closed in, Ava's eyes locked on Daniel once again. He stood there, unfeeling, unmoving, his gaze cold and final. His look was the finality of everything she had once known. Ava's heart clenched, but within the pain, there was a flicker of something else, resolve. She knew in that moment that the real fight was just beginning. The war for the truth, for justice, was far from over. She didn't know if she could escape, if there was any way out of this suffocating situation, but one thing was clear. The questions about Project Erebus, the mystery she had uncovered, would lead her down a path that would change everything. She wouldn't allow herself to become a pawn in their game, not anymore. This was her fight now, and she would see it through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, its concrete walls dull and imposing under the faint, flickering light overhead. Ava was strapped tightly to a metal chair, the ropes biting into her wrists and ankles. But the physical pain hardly registered anymore. The agony she felt wasn't from the ropes. It was from something far deeper. Everything around her seemed to fade into the background. Nothing mattered now. Not the pain, not the cold. All that mattered was the truth she had uncovered and the devastating reality that the person standing before her, the one she had trusted most, was the very one who had orchestrated her fall into this trap. Daniel Voss stood there, his face unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. His gaze was as cold as ice, his smile twisted with a malicious satisfaction that made Ava's blood run cold. Once they had been partners, side by side in some of the most dangerous missions, sharing both triumphs and losses. They had supported each other, trusted each other with their lives. But now, that trust was shattered. Now Daniel was nothing more than a stranger, someone she no longer recognized. His betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever imagined. "You're not the first, Ava." Daniel's voice was flat, detached, void of any warmth or compassion. "Project Erebus isn't just an experiment. It's the way we eliminate agents like you. The ones who ask too many questions, the ones who refuse to follow orders, who won't accept what they're told." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, tearing apart every shred of loyalty, every ounce of justice she had spent her career believing in. The ideals she had clung to, the sense of righteousness that had guided her all these years, now felt like nothing more than a cruel joke. Her chest tightened as anger and helplessness flooded her, choking her from the inside. It wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the betrayal. It was the realization that the person she had once trusted more than anyone had been a part of this, had helped orchestrate her downfall. She could endure any physical torture, but this, the pain of betrayal, was a wound that would never heal. Daniel continued, his voice unwavering, as if delivering nothing more than a routine report. "You thought you were special, that you were doing the right thing. The truth is, you were just a pawn in a much bigger game. The FBI, everything you believed in, it's all part of Project Erebus. You're just one of many agents controlled, manipulated into performing tasks that serve not justice, but the agendas of those behind the scenes." Each word he spoke cut through her like a blade, and the truth of his betrayal gnawed at her insides. The crushing weight of it all pressed down on her chest until it felt like she was suffocating. The pain wasn't just from the revelation about Erebus, but from the crushing realization that everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, was a lie. The very institution she had devoted her life to had used her, had turned her into a pawn in their twisted game. The ideals of justice, the promises of protection, were all nothing more than illusions. The conversation between them, though riddled with pain and tension, revealed the depth of the conspiracy that had been quietly unfolding around her. The agents she had once considered allies, the colleagues she had trusted, were not protectors of justice. They were pawns, manipulated and controlled by dark forces hidden within the very system they had sworn to uphold. Ava couldn't continue to suffer under this brutality. She couldn't let this stand. But she also knew that if she was to reclaim the truth, to break free from the grip of this betrayal, she would have to face Daniel. She would have to face the man who embodied everything she had fought against, the one who represented the very betrayal that had torn her world apart. This moment, this confrontation, was the turning point. She had to decide, could she keep fighting, or would she be swallowed by the very system she had once believed in? The interrogation room remained silent, save for the steady rhythm of raindrops against the window. Ava, despite being tightly bound to the chair, exuded an eerie calmness. Her gaze, once filled with anger and disappointment, was now icy and focused, like a predator in the shadows. She wasn't the cornered victim anymore. Now, she was in control. Daniel stood before her, his smug grin still present, but Ava knew this wasn't the time for regrets. It was time to take control. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft yet decisive. "You think you're winning, don't you? You think I'll crumble? But you don't understand." Daniel's brow furrowed, but he remained silent. Ava pressed on. "Do you think I'll sit here and wait to disappear? You have no idea what I've endured. Your words won't break me." Then, a crack appeared. Daniel's hesitation was brief, but it was enough for Ava to push further. "Simon Vance," Daniel muttered reluctantly, his voice raspy. "He's the one behind it all. Project Erebus. He's the one controlling everything." The revelation hit Ava like a thunderclap. Simon Vance, the man who had been operating in the shadows, was the mastermind. He was the key to everything. Ava's lips curled into a cold smile, not of satisfaction, but of realization. She now had the leverage to take down the entire operation. With that, Ava knew this was no longer about survival. This was about turning the tables. Simon Vance's name was the key to exposing the system that had betrayed her. The game had changed, and Ava was no longer a pawn. She was the one in control. The fight for the truth had only just begun. The dim light in the interrogation room did little to dispel the chill that hung in the air, but Ava felt a strength rising within her. Daniel, though still maintaining his smug, arrogant demeanor, was unaware of the shift in her. Ava had regained control, and all it took was a moment of distraction for her to act. That moment arrived. Daniel, seemingly indifferent, let his guard slip as he turned away. Ava seized the opportunity. With a swift twist, she leaned forward, using the strength in her legs to deliver a powerful punch to his chest. Daniel staggered backward, crashing to the floor, his head hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. For a brief moment, his body lay motionless, and that was when Ava made her move. She quickly grabbed the gun that had fallen to the ground, her fingers tightening around the handle. A surge of power, of control, flooded through her. Fear and doubt were gone. She couldn't stop now. There was no way out except forward. Within seconds, she sprinted toward the door, not daring to look back. But just as she reached for the handle, the blaring sound of an alarm echoed throughout the room, cutting through the silence and adding a new layer of tension. The shrill noise bounced off the walls, growing louder, making the air feel heavier. The interrogation room door had locked automatically, a mechanical barrier that would be difficult to breach. But Ava wasn't deterred. She had prepared for this moment. In one swift motion, she pivoted, dashing toward the steel door, undeterred by the alarm. Each step she took was filled with determination. Her face remained stoic, but her heart pounded in her chest, urging her to run faster, to escape. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, the agents quickly closing in. There was no time to hesitate. She had the encrypted file. This was the final piece to expose the horrific conspiracy. But the question remained. How could she escape without leaving a trace? The footsteps grew more distinct, the agents hot on her trail, but Ava didn't stop. The world around her blurred as she focused all her energy on running, navigating every corner, every turn. The steel door ahead was her only escape, but it was also where the greatest danger awaited. She knew that even if she made it out, the real battle would only just begin. The name Simon Vance, the secrets in the file, everything pointed to a final showdown, one that would leave no room for mercy. But today, she had escaped this trap, and Ava knew that no matter how hard the fight ahead would be, she would never give up. She would never stop fighting for the truth. Ava stood before the door to Simon Vance's office at FBI headquarters. Her nerves were tight, but fear no longer controlled her. She had come too far to back down, and this time, nothing could stop her. The door swung open, and the fluorescent lights inside reflected off the thick glass windows, illuminating Simon's face. He was sitting behind his desk, his expression calm, as if he had been expecting her all along. "Ava," he said, his voice low and steady, devoid of any surprise or tension. "I knew you'd come. After all, you couldn't stay out of this game for long." He stood up, his eyes cold as ever. "Project Erebus," he continued, a sinister smile curling on his lips, "is how I protect my power. Agents like you are nothing more than pawns in a much larger plan. You're just one of many to be sacrificed. The FBI is mine, and you can't change that." Each word he spoke was like a knife to Ava's beliefs, severing the last remnants of loyalty and justice she had held. She had spent her life fighting for what she believed was right, and now it was all a cruel joke, reduced to cold, heartless words. But Ava refused to be defeated. The anger inside her flared, but she remained calm, her eyes sharp with resolve. "I don't need to change the entire system," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I just need to make people like you pay." This confrontation was more than just a battle between two people. It was the culmination of Ava's journey to uncover the truth. Every secret, every betrayal she had faced had led her to this moment. And when everything was laid bare, Ava would be the one to expose the truth. The confrontation quickly escalated into a fierce gunfight. Daniel, the agents loyal to Vance, all of them charged at Ava. She weaved through the desks, dodging bullets. Her heart raced faster, but fear was a distant memory. Everything had led to this point. A bullet grazed Ava's shoulder, the pain searing through her, but she couldn't stop. She gritted her teeth, pushing herself forward toward Simon's computer. She knew this was her only chance to expose everything. Despite her injury, she managed to upload the encrypted file to the network, publicly revealing Simon Vance's crimes. A sense of victory pulsed within her, though it was tempered by pain. Her body began to fail her, her mind swam, her vision blurred, but her resolve was unwavering. She had completed her mission. She had exposed the truth to the world, to all those innocent lives that Simon had destroyed. In her final moments, Ava felt like she had fulfilled her duty as a loyal agent, a reluctant hero. As she collapsed, a part of her knew that despite everything, she had won. News of Project Erebus spread rapidly. Simon Vance was arrested, a symbol of power and corruption brought down. The FBI's system trembled, but within it, there were those who began to rise, determined to rebuild from the ground up. The final scene shows a young agent sitting in front of a computer screen, her eyes fixed on Ava's file. She had read about Ava, the sacrifices and courage of the woman she had never met. And in the young agent's eyes, there was a glimmer, a strong determination. She would follow in Ava's footsteps, knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The end of Ava's story wasn't just the conclusion of her life. It was a message about the truth. The truth may demand sacrifices, but it is always worth fighting for. And when everything is said and done, when all is revealed, what remains is the legacy of courage and justice.